spend with you. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy.
With 3 boys to raise, invariably I was asked to coach, whether it be basketball or baseball or football. Help Linda with a boys club that she and a friend of hers started. Originally started out to be Cub Scouts, but they didn't like all the rules and regulations, so they started doing something else so the boys could have fun. So I'd be asked to help out there and do different things. But I remember, especially with baseball and football, I would talk to the boys and I'd say, whatever you do, don't let that pitcher or that man you're designed to block, don't let him win. Bring down the game to that denominator. And so especially in football, you'd have boys that would be a guard or a tackle, and they think, oh, this is what I signed up for. And I tell them, I say, you know what? It is. It's really important. Football is a team sport. And if you don't win against your opponent, the man you're set to block, then he's going to penetrate. He's going to tackle the running back, tackle the quarterback, and it's going to put the team in a deficit. So just lock in, and that's what you do. You don't let him win. If it's called for that, you pull and you get that man. You don't let him win. So if we break things down into that small, that micro, in everything that we do in life, I think it helps out. At least for me, it does. And that's the same way it is with spiritual things. We can't let Satan win. And he tries to win. He tries any number of ways to win. We can never, ever give him the advantage. And that's what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. In 2 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, and verse 11, Paul is writing a follow-up letter to the one that we looked at last Wednesday, 1 Corinthians, where he had to chastise them and come before him and say, you've got this problem, you got that problem. You have any number of problems. And now in the second letter, he said, oh, I'm so proud of you. You corrected what was wrong, and you're doing well. But he still has some rather directed thoughts, one of which is right here, that don't let Satan win. Look what he says. In order that no advantage be taken of us by Satan, for we're not ignorant of his schemes. Before you go out on a football field, depending on high school, college, whatever, you're going to spend time watching film. Or your coach is going to sit there and talk to you and say, here are the tendencies of this particular player. If you're playing baseball, and if you're going to pitch, the coach is going to take you aside and say, here's what this batter feeds on. Don't throw that to him. To the batter, here's what the pitcher throws. Now, all of that is being done to get an advantage. And so Paul writes, we don't want to ever give Satan the advantage because he's always looking for it. He's always looking. And so Paul, in his various letters, he writes and talks about how we're involved in this conflict. And we cannot give Satan any advantage. We can't let him know where there might be a deficiency in our armature. For our struggle, Paul writes to the Ephesians, 4th chapter, verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. When you stop and look and think who we're engaged in warfare with, indeed, how ominous that is. And so throughout the scriptures, there is the rejoinder of never, ever giving Satan even a hint of advantage. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 12. We talked about this morning. For we are not bold to class or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves. But when they measure themselves by themselves, compare themselves with themselves, they're without understanding. We understand that. We realize that we have to stand and we have to face him on our own, because your weaknesses sometimes are not the same as mine. My weaknesses are not the same as yours. And we have to be mindful of it. And we have to strengthen those weaknesses which we have. And we also have to know how he's going to come at us. What's he going to use? How is he going to change? You know, with the way technology is rapidly moving and growing. Some have talked about shape shifting. And I don't know that I agree with that, about shape shifting. But I do realize that people adapt themselves to various scenarios. And I know that Satan is alive and well, and that he adapts. He changes his techniques and the way he comes at us. Look at Ephesians 6th chapter and drop down at verse 12. Again, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Keep being mindful of that. Always. It's not against flesh and blood. It's against somebody far more cunning. See, if we give Satan an advantage, even a little one, he's going to squash us like one would squash a bug. We're fair game to him. And he doesn't have to worry about those out in the world. He's already got them. And I know you've heard that before. But he's looking at you. It's kind of like when you're playing sports as a kid. And doesn't matter what sport, whether you're good at it or not. You cannot give anybody the advantage. And if you do, they're going to take advantage of you. No pun intended. My wife, when she plays basketball, she is so funny. When she was younger, I hope she doesn't mind me bringing this up. Probably so, but she was always taller than the other kids. But when she would get the ball, she would hop and bounce like a rabbit. As she bounced the ball, she would bounce herself. And so really, if you were ever going to guard Linda in basketball, you knew what you had to do, just stop the ball. Chris Simmons, who many of you know. Chris Simmons is 7 feet tall. And Chris would come over and preach in the afternoons here. And he was a member at Lassen Street when I was there. And Sunday afternoons, I rented a gym for us. We got our gym through the schools. And 10, 12 of us guys would go and play basketball. And Chris, you knew how you could beat him because Chris would always go from high to low. At one point, he would always bring the basketball down below his waist. I'm not 7 feet tall. But when Chris would do that, gave me an opportunity to steal the ball from him. The reason I bring that out is that's what Satan does to us. He looks for that opportunity. So the only way I could defend Chris was when he brought the ball down low. And I wasn't the one who figured that out. Mike Odorizzi did. And Mike Odorizzi came back and said, "Did you notice something?" I go, "Yeah, we're getting beat." He goes, "Yeah, but we don't have to get beat. Chris always takes the ball low." Oh. So Mike found the opening. And everybody else on the team, then, whenever they had to guard Chris, could guard it. Chris didn't like it. Chris got upset because he didn't realize how we figured it out. Satan's figured us out. So what Satan does is he comes at us through ignorance. Look at second, and I know it's not right on the overhead. No fault to the person who put the overhead together. Oh, wait a minute, that's me. 2 Corinthians, 2nd chapter, verse 11. We already looked at this passage, but he's talking about ignorance. In order that no advantage be taken of us by Satan. We cannot be ignorant at all. We have to be knowledgeable. We have to understand what the Word of God is. Because quite honestly, if we're ignorant, he's going to attack us from there. And quite honestly, that's where a lot of people struggle, that he gets them, because they don't know the Scriptures. And they'll go off on something that sounds good and get themselves all sorts of twisted. So go back into the book of Hosea, into the 4th chapter, and go down with me into verse 6. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also will reject you from being my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. Ignorance. Now, Paul later on in one of his letters writes, I will not have you ignorant brethren. He's not saying the brethren are ignorant. What he's saying is, I don't want you to be unaware. Because when we're unaware, he's going to get us. We're in a political season, what I call the silly season. And people are going around saying all sorts of ridiculous things. And people are buying it up. Why? Because they don't know what's in our documents of our federation, of our union. They don't know. So they buy into it. Then they spout it to other people that don't know. Isn't that the same way it is religiously? People don't know, and they go on and say something, then repeat it. Repeat it as fact. That's ignorance. The other thing he's looking for is indifference. Remember how this morning we talked about what standard are you measured by? Do you look inside yourself and see yourself as God does? Or do you look at this arbitrary checklist? Unfortunately, a lot of people are apathetic. They've lost interest for whatever reason, but they've lost it. It's no longer important. How do you instill that drive? How do you keep from becoming indifferent? On the overhead, you can see a couple of passages that talk about indifference. I would that I knew how people get motivated, how people stay locked in. At lunch, we've gone to the same restaurant sporadically for 15, 16 years. And as we've gone, every time almost we've gone, we've noticed a couple that have been there. I went over and talked to them today. I said, how long have you been coming here? And they looked at each other and they said, well, our daughter is 29. And we started coming to Topanga Pizza when I was pregnant with our daughter. So 29 years. 29 years. Would you say they're indifferent about that restaurant? No. They haven't lost their desire for that in 29 years. 29 years. So how does that restaurant keep providing them so they'll supply the interest that they'll come back for 29 years? So what do? We do the same thing the restaurant does. We provide food that is palatable, that is nourishing, that supplies what is needed. Now, we're not going to do it the same way they are, but we do it by and through spiritual service. We provide what is necessary. And we try to keep the interest up in everybody. So in that regards, if there's something that I can do that will make the scriptures more relevant to you, I won't compromise. But if you want to hear something that you don't want to be ignorant of, let me know. I tell Linda, what are you hungry for? I tell her. May not get it, but I tell her. And sometimes she'll say, you know what? That's not good for you. You don't get it. You don't get it. And sometimes that's what we do spiritually. Somebody will ask for something, we have to say, you know what? That's not good for you. You're not going to get it. But we don't want people to become indifferent. We were talking about it driving back in the car, about some people that we no longer see. The only thing I can think of is that they become indifferent. And the longer they remain indifferent, the harder it's going to get to produce a spark in them. We become our own worst enemies. We truly do. And Satan sits around waiting for us. We can get overconfident. We can think, no, it's not going to happen to me. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 12. To him who thinks he stands, take heed lest ye fall. Yeah. We can get too full of ourselves and just think that all we have to do is just show up, speaking metaphorically, and if we just show up, we will be the ultimate victor. You know how much I like the Dodgers. And I think that's what happened for them the last couple of weeks. They have so many players that are at the pinnacle of their success. And they thought, oh, we just have to throw our gloves out there and we'll win. Not the case. Not the case. They've been beaten badly. So much so that I had to write David Odorizzi, Mike Odorizzi, Brian Bird, and Caleb Nylebeck. And tell them I was wrong. But the Dodgers will return. They will get it together and they will win. But right now, they're pretty overconfident. And we can do the same thing spiritually. Turn back, if you would, Luke 22, verse 31. Simon, Simon, Jesus said, behold, Simon, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And you, when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. He said to him, Lord, with you I am all ready to go both to prison and to death. And Jesus said to him, I say to you, Peter, the cock will not crow today until you have denied me 3 times that you know me. Peter was overconfident. Jesus even told him, Peter, your overconfidence is going to get you. And Satan sees that crack and he wants to get in. Same thing can be true with us. Don't become overly confident. Oh, we are to have boldness, yes. And we are to have a level of confidence because our trust, our reliance is on God. But I think you know exactly what I'm driving at. Oh, it can't happen to me. Let our guard down. And by the same token, we can also blame others. Oh, it's so easy to blame others. It's not my fault. Why? Well, because here's whose fault it is. No. We've got to step up. We've got to quit offering excuses. And we do it so much. Go back to the 14th chapter of Luke. And in Luke 14, go into verse 16. And notice what's going on there. It's a parable. Parable of the dinner. A certain man was giving a big dinner, and he invited many. And at the dinner hour, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. And on it goes. Are we of that ilk? That we make excuses for everything? We try to hide behind excuses? We tease about kids in school saying, oh, my dog ate the homework. And no dog's going to eat homework. Believe me, I tried that one. I even tried putting gravy and stuff on the homework so I could do, but dogs don't eat people. At least none of the dogs we had. But that's just a feeble excuse, as are all of them. I went to work for a company one time, and they said excuses are not tolerated. If you say you're on the way to work and you don't get here on time because there's been a tie-up on the freeway, it's not a good excuse because you should have anticipated that and found another way to come. No excuse. I didn't work for that company very long. I didn't like the way they approached things. But I did appreciate the fact that they would not tolerate excuses. Turn back into the book of Proverbs, 28th chapter, verse 13. He who conceals his transgressions will not prosper. He who confesses, forsakes them, will find compassion. In other words, you try to hide them. You try to deflect. You try to offer excuses. You got to be honest with yourself. Truly, openly honest. Neglect never got anyone anywhere. Now, time's not going to allow us to go back and talk about the 10 virgins. We're waiting for the bridegroom. And 5 were prudent and 5 were foolish. What excuses could the foolish offer? None. Well, what about with us, with Satan? He's looking to see if we're the type that deflect. We hide behind excuses. The day of the earthquake, we had nothing. Good thing the milkman came that day. I mean, he came after the earthquake happened. He had a truck full of supplies, and we had nothing. We got lucky. Okay, Anon, we need so many dozen eggs, a brick of cheese, so much milk, so much this, so much that. We were lucky. But Linda talked to me afterwards and said, you know, we were ill prepared. We need to be prepared. We need to be prepared. And I deflected. But we had good friends who were prepared, who had taken and put things, survival kit, into barrels in the ground. When the earthquake happened, they went out, popped the tops off the barrels, got the food, got the water, everything they needed. No excuses offered. I was lucky, very lucky. But had it not been for Anon the milkman, I would have been offering excuses. And what about us when Satan comes and he finds us weakened? Are we going to offer up excuses? Well, Satan's given an invitation when we have an attitude of carelessness. We're untroubled. We're unconcerned. We just don't care. We're careless. Careless with our spirituality. We give little regards to where we are spiritually. Hebrews 2nd chapter, verses 1, 2, and 3. How shall we escape if we, next word, neglect so great a salvation? So Satan wants us to neglect. Through indolence, the rafters sink, is what Solomon wrote. And that's simply neglect. Careless. You know the word. And what it means is, basically, I could care less. It's indicative of an attitude problem. And Satan sees those attitudes. You can't let him win. Can't. No matter what. Don't let him win. And a lot of the ways that he wins is that he wins by and through our attitude. Neglect, carelessness, overconfidence, and so on. So we strengthen the inner man as we talked about this morning. And then we get a resolve, I will not let him win. Remember a little boy on a football team, Pop Warner, and he wanted to play so bad. But he was little and he was skinny and scrawny. And his mother said she didn't want him getting hurt. His father said he didn't want him being where he would get tackled. I'm thinking, okay, they play tackle football, they got pads on, they're little, they're playing against little guys. Where am I going to put him? How am I going to effectively deal with him? I made him center. And that little kid was mean. He would not let anyone around. He would do whatever he could to block the guy in front of him. He would throw himself at the other kid's knees. And I told him, you can't block that way. Well, coach, I put him down, didn't I? Yeah, but you don't do that. So he did everything he could, laid himself on the line because he had a warrior mentality. Little kid was amazing. Amazing. And that's what we have to do. We have to develop a warrior mentality because we're in conflict with Satan and we can't let him win. On the overhead, you can see a couple passages. But I want us instead, you can read them, I want us instead to go to Romans and into the 8th chapter. Because ideally, what we've really been talking about today is looking at our Savior from the inside out, trying to determine whose strength are we living up to. Ours by checking all the boxes, or God by Him checking on our heart and us doing what He would have us do. And this afternoon, whether or not we're willing to stand firm against Satan and to not let him win. Because ultimately, what we've been talking about is victory. The victory that's found in Jesus. Look at Romans, the 8th chapter, verse 31. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who is against us? That's that little kid that I made guard or center. As time went on, no matter who, he was bound and determined to put his body in the way, to do what he could to stop any encroachment. Did he always win? Nope. But he always got up and tried harder. He was an amazing little kid. And when I saw him play, I always thought of this verse. Always. Go on a little bit further. He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? Who will bring a charge against God's elect? God is the one who justifies. Who is the one who condemns? Jesus Christ is he who died, yea, rather was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who also intercedes for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Stop. Is that a rhetorical question? Could be. But the only one that will separate us from the love of Christ is us. Is us. And letting Satan win. And us giving Satan the advantage. We don't want to give him an advantage. He goes on. Who is the one who condemns? Jesus Christ is he who died, yes, rather, who is raised, who is at the right hand of God, who also intercedes for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, sword. 36. Just as it is written, for thy sake, we are being put to death all day long. We were considered as sheep to be slaughtered. 37. But in all these things, we overwhelmingly conquer through him who loved us. Overwhelmingly. Overwhelmingly. Not just by the skin of our teeth, but we overwhelmingly conquer if we stay in a league and in alignment with Christ. So no matter what, don't let Satan win, because the victory can be ours. And victory was David's, as long as he had the backing of the God of heaven. And that's what we want. Victory over Satan. The lesson is yours this afternoon. Mary, I'm sorry. It was longer than 7 minutes. I'll give a 7-minute one in a couple weeks. Anyways, we're glad that we were able to have this time. Hopefully it's been beneficial to you. But if there's any here who might be subject to the invitation in any way, everybody that's here has heard the message preached on more than one occasion. If there's any way we can be of spiritual service, we invite you to come while together we stand and